Hi, this is Brass Check, and we're recording this on May 20th, 2021. Not sure when this will be posted. My technical assistant, who I completely depend on, has a mild case of pneumonia, but in the country that he lives in, he tells me that the medical system is in complete disarray um, due to the panic and the fraud and the insanity that's going on, and the level of care he's getting is very poor. And he's been gone 3 days now. I don't know when I'm going to see him next, so I don't know when this thing's coming out. I hope in a timely way. Um, I want to thank everybody who's sent me. I've gotten some nice letters and some nice emails thanking me for the work that I've done over the last 14 months. Thank you. I appreciate it. This is hard work, and there's not a whole lot of people doing it. And to people that are putting their money where their mouth is, I really appreciate you guys because we've got server bills, email bills, my tech helper who is getting paid full time. That's how much it's, and he doesn't just do Brass Check. I do some other projects too, but still I have to have this guy on 40 hours a week every week just to keep the ship afloat, and that's not free. Um, so anyway, thanks to everybody who's doing that. That's you. I hope you're getting what you're paying for. I think you are, frankly. I mean, I've seen some bad reporting in the last over my lifetime. Um, 9/11, the fraud that led us into Iraq, um, various bogus terrorist operations that turned out to be FBI facilitated. I mean, I've seen a lot, but boy, I've never seen it on this scale. And so interesting is that all the progressives and all the crusading journalists are nowhere to be seen. And if they are somewhere to be seen, they're in lockstep with the fraud. It's the most amazing thing. I've lost quite a few friends and colleagues over this. I'm not going to shed a tear about it, but it's just very, very interesting. Um, so, quick news items, really fascinating. So, some astute congressman asked the head of the FDA and the head of the CDC and the head of the Fauci's division of the NIH asked Fauci, how many of your employees are getting the vaccine? Think about it. These three organizations have worked in coordination to terrorize the entire country and world into getting these vaccines. And if everybody doesn't rush and get the vaccine right away, the world's going to come to an end. So, what percentage of the CDC's employees and the FDA's employees and the NIH's employees have gotten the vaccine? They all estimated, because they don't have numbers. They all estimated about half. About half. So we're all supposed to run around in a state of abject terror, while the people that are running this terror campaign, they're not really in a big rush to get the vaccine. And I remember there was a survey done of nurses in New Jersey about 8 or 9 months ago, maybe even longer actually. Before any vaccines were developed. And they asked, are you going to get a vaccine for COVID? Half of them said, hell no. So when the people closest to the fraud, and that would be nurses, doctors, and federal public health bureaucrats, are not getting the vaccine, what does that tell you? By the way, you won't, I doubt CNBC or CBS or NBC or CNN or any of those outlets are going to tell you this simple fact that the employees, and guess what? Guess why Fauci and company don't know how many of their employees are just guessing? Because federal employment laws prohibit them from asking. Okay, so all these other employers are being encouraged to terrorize their employees, to threaten them with losing their jobs, and in fact to fire them for not having the vaccine. But the people running the scam, they are prohibited by law, from even asking whether their employees have had the vaccine or not. And they're certainly prohibited from compelling it and making it a condition for employment. And yet every working person in this country has a gun to their head over this bullshit. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Anyway, book came out in the UK, and it is called, and I don't have my notes handy because I'm running from one thing to the next, really. But if you'll bear with me, I will tell you the name of the book. Okay, the name of the book is A State of Fear. And it's available on as an ebook on Amazon. And the subtitle is How the UK Government Weaponized Fear During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And it came out May 16, 2021. And the author is a woman named Laura Dodsworth. God bless her. And it already has 12 ratings, and they're all 5 stars. We've been talking about the weaponization of fear since March of 2020, but this lady got it in the pages of a book. So let's dig into this, and I'm just going to read this article. Report: Government scientific advisors admit they used totalitarian fear tactics to control people during the pandemic. The way we have used fear is dystopian. And this appears in the London Telegraph. Of course, you have to be a subscriber to get it, so I'm reading somebody's account of the article. Scientists in the UK working as advisors for the government have expressed regret for using what they now admit to be, quote, unethical and, quote, totalitarian methods of instilling fear in the population in order to control behavior during the pandemic, according to a report. The London Telegraph reports the comments made by members of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on Behavior, SP1-B, a subcommittee of the Scientific Advisory Group for Emergencies, SAGE, excuse me, the government's chief scientific advisory group, by the way, which is staffed with a bunch of non-scientific idiots. The report quotes a briefing from March 2020 as the first lockdown was decreed that stated government should drastically increase, quote, the perceived level of personal threat, unquote, that the virus poses because, quote, a substantial number of people still do not feel sufficiently threatened, unquote. Now, we know the same thing was going on in Germany. They were literally sitting around cooking up bullshit to terrify people. And one of the things they did cook up was the lie and fraud, deliberate, that children could carry this to their grandparents and kill them. That was a manufactured story and disseminated to instill terror. That was in Germany. One scientist with the SPI-B admits that in March 2020, the government was very worried about compliance and they thought people wouldn't want to be locked down. No shit, Sherlock. There were discussions about fear being needed to encourage compliance, and decisions were made about how to ramp up that fear. I mean, well, you could just spend a year talking about this paragraph. They were worried about compliance, and they thought people wouldn't want to be locked up. So there were discussions, and decisions were made. This is how they justify themselves. These monsters. The unnamed scientist, and of course they're all unnamed, adds that the way we have used fear is dystopian. No shit. The scientists further confessed that, quote, the use of fear has definitely been ethically questionable. It's been like a weird experiment. Ultimately, it backfired because people became too scared, unquote. It's like a weird experiment. I mean, can you believe the mentality of these people? Another separate scientist on the subcommittee professed, quote, "You could call psychology mind control. That's what we do. Clearly, we try and go about it in a positive way, but it has been used nefariously in the past." Again, amazing doublespeak. It's been used nefariously in the past. What about what you did? Another scientist warned that, quote, "We have to be very careful about the authoritarianism that is creeping in," adding, "People use the pandemic to grab power and drive through things that wouldn't happen otherwise." No kidding. According to the report, another researcher with the group acknowledged that without a vaccine, psychology is your main weapon. And then he says, psychology has had a really good epidemic, actually. These people are sick. Yet another scientist on the subcommittee stated that they have been, quote, "stunned by the weaponization of behavioral psychology," end of quote, over the past year, and warned that, quote, "psychologists didn't seem to notice when it stopped being altruistic and became manipulative," end of quote. No kidding. They have too much power and it intoxicates them, the scientist further warned. No kidding. The comments were collected by author Laura Dodsworth for her book A State of Fear, out today, that explores the government's actions during the pandemic. When the Telegraph asked the committee for comment on the findings, SPI-B psychologist Gavin Morgan replied, "Clearly, using fear as a means of control is not ethical. Using fear smacks of totalitarianism. It's not an ethical stance for any modern government." Morgan added that by nature I am an optimistic person, but all this has given me a more pessimistic view of people. Well, I don't have a more pessimistic view of people. I have a realistic view of people in government. And if you ever had any doubt about what kind of scumbags they are, I hope this has cleared it up once and for all. These people are a positive menace to humanity. They need to be constrained. But if you go out and protest, what do? Water cannons, tear gas, billy clubs, beatings, mass arrests. Isn't that what happened in the UK? Isn't that what happened everywhere there were protests? So where does this go? Let's keep reading. The government state of fear continues minute by minute as government ministers are now suggesting that so-called, quote, Freedom Day in the UK, a situation where the government permits people to have basic rights, is not freedom, on June 21st, is under threat because a sizable portion of the population is refusing to take their vaccine. That's just that's a last line of this article. So there's going to be, so they've promised a Freedom Day to the citizens of the UK, June 21st. I guess that's the day you're no longer a COVID lockdown prisoner. And I guess if I read this poorly written sentence correctly, they're basically saying, you know what, we may not have that day. That day may not come because not enough of you have had the vaccine. I want to repeat something. The sheriff of Ulster County, New York, has told the inmates in the county jail, only 20% of whom have volunteered to get the vaccine. The other 80%, quite wisely, have said no. He's said, well, if there's not 100% compliance, there will be no in-person visits for anybody. He's basically promoting violence within the prison. because, let's face it, a lot of people in prison have problems with violence and impulse control and anger. And if somebody feels they're not getting their in-person visit because, somebody else is not going with a vaccine, um, I would almost guarantee there'll be violence. So in true concentration camp style, this piece of shit sheriff in Ulster County um, is acting as if he knows anything about science or medicine, and is creating a situation that's almost certain to end in some kind of bloodshed. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. And now we have the government of the UK telling its citizens, well, not enough of you are vaccinated, so the lockdowns continue. I don't know where this breaks and how this breaks. Um, it's probably going to require hundreds of thousands of people in the streets not backing down. I think that's really what it's going to take. We don't have anything that looks like that in the United States. For one reason, we have some states that are slowly starting to behave normally. Um, Not California and Florida and New York, of course. They are literally in the process of destroying their economies. But people don't seem to be bothered. Uh, I don't know of any protests in the United States. Do you? Anything comparable to what's gone on in England or in Canada or in Australia or in all, any European country you can name? Um, I don't know I don't see how, unless these people, and I use the term loosely, start to feel physically threatened by the size of the crowds that they can't control, they're going to keep this going on without end, you know, without end. And then meanwhile, Fauci and company are going to casually mention in a congressional hearing that, yeah, our employees aren't getting the vaccine. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do? So anyway, this is Brass Check. I hope we hear this in some reasonable amount of time. I hope my assistant feels better and gets better soon. He did not go to the doctor because he was rightfully concerned about the insanity that he was going to encounter when he walked into a hospital with a respiratory problem. As bad as it is and it is bad in developed countries, it's really bad in less developed countries because they just don't they just play follow the leader. They look at what the United States is doing and then they try to copy it, and it's a real catastrophe. If you have any exposure or knowledge of what's happening to people all around the world, I mean, you know, a lot of people have had fairly semi-normal lives throughout this in the developed world. It's been maybe inconvenient, but for people that actually work for a living, and if they don't work, they starve. This has caused and continues to cause an incredible amount of suffering, and completely off the radar screen of the mass media. I mean, there's two ways to kill people. You can put a bullet in their head, or you can slowly starve them to death and deprive them of normality and access to simple medical care. When we wanted to, soften Iraq, we spent, 10 plus years bombing their water purification plants and their electric supply plants and just making life miserable. And in the process, we killed hundreds of thousands of vulnerable people slowly. And I don't know. I don't have time to do the numbers. I'm surprised nobody out there is doing them. We have a planet of 6 billion people, all of them or more, all of them have been put in some level of disarray by this. And the poorer you are, the harder, the more this hurts. And when you're at that level of material deprivation, it's not hard to kill people and have them sicken and die, or have their lives shortened. So who knows how many millions of people are losing their lives to this as we speak right now. I'm sure it's a lot, and I nobody's even counting. Instead, they're waiting for the bar to open. I don't know what people are doing. I don't know. It's a discouraging time, but um, you know, here's this great book, and it's the beginning of something. It's the acknowledgement that the people running this were lying and manipulative. And I think it's pretty clear that in spite of the inflated numbers, that this was in fact nothing more than a bad flu. I mean, some people claim they know lots of people that have died of COVID. Um, I just hear bizarre stories like, oh yeah, he was fine, he got a vaccine, and then 2 weeks later he died of COVID. God, what a shame. Or yeah, he's was 80 pounds overweight and he's had diabetes for 30 years, and he's on 18 different medications, and he went into the hospital and they intubated him and he died of COVID. Really? I remind everybody that one of the things that the Nazi doctors were put on trial for after World War II was the falsification of death certificates. It wasn't what they were hung for. They were hung for experimenting on people without their consent or permission. Um, but they were also charged with falsifying death certificates because that used to be a big deal. Now it's not a big deal anymore. Some public health hack can write a memo and tell everybody, hey, if the guy had a cough and he died, call it COVID. And ignore every other disease he had, ignore every other vulnerability he had, just call it COVID. But we've been over that a million times. But anyway, this book has come out. It's something. It's a start. Uh, God bless the author, Laura Dodsworth. And the book is called A State of Fear. It, of course, is not available in the United States, but you can go to, if you search for it. By the way, there's another book by that title, so you have to get the right book. A State of Fear, How the UK Government Weaponized Fear During the COVID-19 Pandemic. And you can get it in an ebook format, or can you? Gee, it looked like you could. I don't know. I can't really figure out how all this stuff works. But anyway, oh, interesting. It's the #1 bestseller in social sciences in the UK. Wow. But it says in stock on June 15th. So it sounds like you can't, I don't know. I don't know what the deal is with this book, but it exists. Some people have read it. Some people have reviewed it. And the truth is coming out. A, they lied. B, they were deliberately manipulative. Okay. Not really news to any of us, but it's good that there's a book that documents that. So that's Brass Check. Thank you for all your support. Thank you for enabling me to report all these things 14 months ago. But hey, better late than never, and this is a really big accomplishment that this book has been created and put out to the public.